Do you believe in UFOs, astral projections, mental telepathy, ESP, clairvoyance, spirit photography, telekinetic movement, full trance mediums, the Loch Ness Monster, and the theory of Atlantis?
There are some things in this world that go way beyond human understanding. Things that cannot be explained, things that most people don't want to know about.
Dead people like in graves and coffins?
Walking around like regular people. They don't see each other. They only see what they want to see. They don't know they're dead.
Of course not. And that is the whole problem with aliens, is you just can't trust them. Occasionally you meet a nice one, Starman, E.T., but usually they turn out to be some kind of big lizard.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural.
There's a feeling I keep coming back to. It doesn't have a name. Not really. It's not terror or panic or even paranoia. This one is quiet. This one seems to wait. It usually starts at the edge of something, somewhere between the second and third step down a dark hallway. Maybe in the breath of silence at the end of a conversation. Sometimes it's in the middle of the night when the air feels heavier than it should. Or other times, it's in broad daylight when everything should be fine, but it isn't. And then you feel it, like you're being watched. You turn around, nothing's there. Maybe you laugh. Maybe you shake it off. Perhaps you just move on. But something in you doesn't quite settle because deep down, some part of you knows. You felt it. You always feel it. It comes and goes like a shadow that's not attached to anything. Now, if you were to tell someone that, they'd probably give you a look, say you need more sleep. They might say it's stress. Say it's just your imagination filling in the blank spaces your mind is not able to put together. And maybe they're right. But psychologists, they would say there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. You see, it's neural pathways or psychological triggers, that a pattern-seeking brain is just doing its job. They might quote studies, they could show you graphs, they could talk about the reality of hypervigilance or the subconscious threat perception. But sometimes, they may feel it too, and they just don't like to admit it. Because here's the thing. If it's just one person feeling it, I could let it go. I could call it personal. I could chalk it up to anxiety, bad lighting, a creaking floorboard. But it's not just one person, it's all of us. Everyone I've ever talked to, no matter how skeptical, no matter how rational, has had a moment where they knew something was there. A presence, something watching them. Maybe it passed. Maybe they never spoke of it again. But it was there, and they felt it in their bones. And everyone feels it. Maybe it's not just a glitch in the system. Maybe it's the system working exactly as it's supposed to. Maybe something is watching. You see, we live in a world that is allergic to mystery. It's allergic to the supernatural, and we want answers. We want easy explanations, and we want simple pigeonhole labels. We just want everything to fit in tidy little folders. They're safe, they're categorized, done. We don't have to look at them again. But there are things that don't fit, moments that don't obey the rules, and we don't talk about those. Maybe we should. Because what if that feeling isn't the mind malfunctioning, but something else pressing in? What if that creeping unease is a signal, not a flaw? What if it's a warning? And here's the part that really unsettles me. What if whatever's been watching has been doing it for a long time? Longer than we've had words, longer than we've lived in walls. Maybe back when we lived in the dark and whispered stories to each other just to survive the night. Maybe that feeling, that twinge of dread when you're alone, is the echo of something older than fear. And today we're going to stare into that feeling. We're not going to explain it away. We're not going to dismiss it. We're going to walk right up to the edge and listen, because something is there. And I don't think it wants to stay hidden anymore. So, feel free to get comfortable. If you're listening to this in the evening, turn down the lights. And if by chance you feel something watching you, don't look away. The world we see is a thin veil stretched over something deeper, something older, something that doesn't always follow the rules of time, space, or reason. And you've heard the stories, the ones whispered in hushed voices, dismissed as tricks of the mind. The shadow in the hallway when no one's there, the footsteps in the attic when the house is empty, or the figure on the roadside that vanishes in your rearview mirror. Coincidence? Imagination? Or evidence that reality is far stranger than we dare to admit? Today we're going to step into the unknown. We'll set aside skepticism just for a moment. We'll open the door to things that lurk just beyond the edges of our understanding. Stories of the unexplained, the unsettling, and the undeniably spooky. And joining us again is the author of the Strange Bridgerland stories, John Olsen. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is always a lot of fun, so I appreciate coming on.
Of course, appreciate you coming back. So since we last spoke, you actually have quite a bit of things new coming on and going on and things. Can we just talk about where readers can read some of your books? I mean, you've got several of them here.
Mm-hmm.
Real simple. It's a whole series, like I said, the Stranger Bridgerland series. And let's just talk about where people can find your books and kind of your main goals there.
Yeah, so you can find them all on Amazon. You can they come in either softback, Kindle, or Audible version. And then a few of them I have on hardback. I'm trying to get all of them on hardback right now. And they're all available on Amazon under the Stranger Bridgerland book series. So.
Fantastic. I'll make sure to link some of these down in the show notes here. We spoke last time about how some of your stuff got started with you living in a farmhouse that was built in like the 1880s, and and some of these really kind of spookier things going on. But you've grown that into an entire shtick, if I can say so, by talking to people and interviewing them about experiences, because we all have things that are weird in our lives, and we need to talk about them to kind of get closure, healing, or understanding that we're not really alone when there's something odd or off in our lives.
Yeah, definitely.
What are some of these?
Sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say definitely. It helps most people when they've had a strange experience to be able to share it and know that they're not alone. So,
yeah, I mean, and you've covered like what kinds of things, from ghosts, cryptid. What's a cryptid, by the way, so the audience understands what that means?
So a cryptid would be an unknown creature, there's a lot of, like, for example, Bigfoot, and you could ask 5 different Bigfoot experts and get 5 different explanations on what they believe it is. But yeah, so cryptids can range from unidentified animals, and even a lot of, the one that everybody thinks of is Bigfoot, or a lot of lake monsters would be considered cryptids as well. So.
Yeah, something that had been kind of weighing on my mind a little bit as I go back and kind of look at some of these stories that I've read about people. And one of the ones that really disturbs me the most, and I kind of resonate to, is feeling like you're being watched. And it's like, it's not that difficult for the mind to kind of play tricks on you and go, there's something maybe stalking me. And I'm kind of curious as to what you think that is. I mean, is this some kind of primal instinct or something that's within us, or could we really be being watched by something?
It's interesting that you asked that, because I believe it's something primal inside of us. So to give you a little background, I grew up in the West, and outdoors were my thing. I grew up learning how to hunt and fish from my grandpa, my dad, and I spent a lot of time in the wilderness because of that. And something that my grandpa and my dad both taught me, because I did a lot of bow hunting when I was younger, and they taught me that once you find out where your quarry is, say you're hunting deer, and you find that deer that you wanted to hunt and that you wanted to sneak up on, I was always taught not to put too much of your attention on it after you'd seen it. And I just kind of left that for granted, but over my time of watching animals and things like that, they really can feel when somebody is or something is watching them. And I think humans are a lot like that too, because though we're completely separated from our ancestors who made a living from hunting and being hunted in the forest, we still have that. And so I honestly believe, and I've had experiences where I was in the woods and I felt like I was being watched. And there were times where I never did figure out what it was. But then there were other times too when I found out later on it was a predator. For example, I was bow hunting one day, and I was down near a water hole, and I just got the most creepy feeling that I was being watched. And when I finally left, there was mountain lion tracks that had followed me down the trail, and he had stepped off, and he had watched me. And even though I didn't know, I never saw him or saw where he was, I had that, creepy feeling of, hey, something's watching you. So I do think it's a primal thing that our ancestors had, and we still have it. And it goes right into the paranormal, because there's no scientific reason why you should be able to feel that something's watching you, or the animals can feel when they're being watched. And yet I have seen that multiple times, that either humans or animals, are being watched and they know it. It's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's this sensation that the hairs on the back of your neck stand up kind of feeling. We're out here too, where we've got, cougars, mountain lions that are pretty common. And so you're a little bit more mindful at night when you're walking the dogs because that's what they're hunting. They're not really, maybe they will go after a person if they're starving, but they won't go after them, a full-grown adult for no reason.
Right.
But it's like they're watching the dog, or they're looking for the toddler or the small child. I mean, it's a real risk you take when you're in cougar country or in bear country. You have to be mindful of these potentials.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I think it goes into the paranormal as well, because I know there have been times when I've felt like I was being watched and not knowing what it was, or it feeling much more paranormal. And I think the same kind of deal goes along with the paranormal when there's other entities out there that are maybe stalking people or watching people. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've heard stories about things like shadow entities, etc., that pop up from time to time. But it's a real interesting idea that, I mean, with a biological entity, a person, I mean, if you're riding on a bus and you feel somebody's eyes are on you, and you look and they either glance away quickly, or there's all sorts of like little furtive glances that happen, or you could be in a crowded room and you're engaged in a conversation, like, man, someone's watching me, and you look and it's like maybe a young lady or something that's been staring at you off and on. I mean, things like this. And so it's not simply a warning mechanism so much as like an awareness mechanism. And it's an interesting concept that we call it paranormal, because it's like a sense that isn't really keyed into, physical contact, but our eyes land on something and it seems to leave an impression.
Yeah, exactly. And it's what's very interesting to me, and I'm not smart enough to understand quantum physics, but from what I've read a lot, there's a lot of connection in quantum physics that seem magical or paranormal just because they have no idea how things are linked together. For example, the fact that you can pair up two particles, then separate them by, infinite number of miles, and then vibrate the one, and the other one starts vibrating at the exact same frequency, for example. And that surpasses our knowledge of how anything works with communication, with the speed of light and all of these things. So I love the fact that physics is kind of getting into the idea that, things aren't exactly as we have always thought they were. And it kind of bolsters up that paranormal or magic is honestly science that we don't understand yet.
Yeah, and it's not merely that. I mean, it's even like, what's one of the other things that's real common? The idea that paintings are following you is, some of the Renaissance artists were really good at what they did. And, some people would go and see the Mona Lisa, and it was like her vision can follow you as you move around. And it's a real peculiar thing because, it's like a trick of the mind, or it's whatever it is. Biologically speaking, our eyes are designed the way they are so that, if we're looking at another person, we can tell that they're looking at us, as opposed to an animal that their whole eye is something, like a bird's eye or something like that. They don't have a big lot of white in their eyes, so you can't really see where they're looking. And that's the thing that's with paintings, but it's also with dolls. And I think some of the weirdest stories come out of dolls, and the fact that if a doll is missing a feature that's common for people, we get like a Raggedy Ann doll, and the Raggedy Ann doll is missing like its 2-button eyes or something, it's going to feel a little bit more creepy. But then at the same time, when it looks a little too human, it even looks creepy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And you're hitting on that. What I like to talk about with the uncanny valley and things like of that nature, where we're kind of designed to pick out things that look like human or look like they're supposed to, but they just don't hit right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then some of those examples out there. I mean, I already mentioned shadow people, but I think another one that's really big is Slender Man. And I think that's an interesting one to talk about because it's a generated entity designed by a creepypasta. It's a creepypasta competition, and now it's like a real thing. And so I'm wondering the power of horror films or manufactured folklore that taps into this.
Well, and it's so it's interesting you to bring that up, because I was talking to a gentleman, and his argument was that the paranormal was not real because of just what you said. He's like, Slender Man was never a real thing. Then somebody made it up, and now people are seeing it. So that tells me that it's just their imagination and that this isn't real. And I tried to explain to him that, in my belief anyway, there is a lot of different entities out there that will take what is in your mind's eye is what's scary, and they will actually use that to get to you. Because if you see Slender Man, it's not really Slender Man, but it is something taking that form to use to scare you or to get what it wants out of you, if that makes sense.
Right. And this is where the line gets differentiated between the sense of getting out because something's watching you, and it's like we find cougar prints or bear tracks or something in our where we are. But this is like there's no evidence of any. We're an area that's known not to contain predatorial animals. We're in the middle of his town, and we're at the park, and something's watching us, and there's no other people around, and then something's there, and it's playing on our fear state.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that I also point to, which is just amazing to me, and I wish I had the numbers. I should have them memorized, but there are a certain number of people in the United States who go missing under circumstances that make no sense and are never seen again. Not a lot of the missing people, you attribute a certain amount to kids that run away from home, a certain amount to, being murdered or being kidnapped or, all of these things. And then there's a sliver that's still significant of people who vanish almost out of thin air. And we talk a lot about the missing 411 where they go missing in the forests but there's even another number of people. I always go back to this one, for example. There was this retired couple in California. They lived in a subdivision. The husband had finished lunch. He said, I'm going to go out in the back and mow the lawn. And so he walked out the back door. His wife remembered, we've got this thing later. I better remind him. Went almost right behind him out the door, and he was gone. And he was never seen again. He walked out of a door and disappeared. And it's things like that make me wonder if there aren't possibly things out there that we, obviously there's things we don't understand, but are there predators that we don't know about that are doing things to take people? Because I've interviewed so many people in different situations where entities were trying to lure them away, whether it was into the forest or into abandoned buildings. And so it's really kind of scary, to be honest.
Yeah, you're talking about, for example, David Paulides. He's really big on this, the missing 411. And, the statistical numbers are so crazy that, it takes somebody. David Paulides was a former police officer a detective investigator. For people who may not have heard of this guy. But, as you were saying, it's like in the United States, and I think the number is smaller for the unexplained disappearances. But every year, like 600,000 people go missing in the United States alone. And then of those unexplained or unsolvables, it's like 93,000, right? People just go out into the woods, mountain areas. And I've heard somebody flippantly said it's kind of like the simulation doesn't want to print that 3D or render that 3D area for them. And so they just, sorry, the Sim's like, sorry, I'm just going to cut you off and you're gone. And you get, reinstalled somewhere else. And then, as a child or something, that's kind of like their little flippant way of trying to kind of figure out what's going on. But I mean, those stories are so crazy. I mean, can you share any of those that was really impactful for you that you've heard or talked to somebody about?
So, one that comes to mind, And again, I don't have my notes in front of me, so I don't remember the names, but in one of my books, I had interviewed this gentleman, and he lived in northern part of California. And when he was a teenager, him and his buddies would always go out to this abandoned house, and in the backyard they would just have a bonfire at night and hang out, and it bordered a forest, like a northwest forest. And one night, him and two of his friends were having a bonfire, and they could hear a woman calling for help. And so they went out and tried to find this woman that was calling for help. And the further away they got, further into the forest, the more this just creepy feeling of this doesn't seem right came over them. And then at one point, this entity came out from behind the tree to look at them, which it was obviously this thing that was mimicking a woman's voice, and tall, white, wide mouth, pointy kind of teeth, just something out of your nightmares. And one of his friends, the fastest one, took off and knocked the other two down. And so they were scrambling to get up, and they were mad at him, and they were able to run back and get away. But yeah, it's just this idea that something was trying to lure them into the forest and away from safety to do whatever. But I've interviewed several people, quite a few people who've had experiences like that, whether it's somebody a child or a woman calling for help, or mimicking somebody they know. That's a big one as well. Usually when it's children, they will mimic an older child that they look up to. I have several that are called stories that are called "Not My Cousin," because they were camping, and something that looked like their cousin that they looked up to were trying to lure them further and further into the woods and away from camp. And in fact, there's one area up Logan Canyon where I live in northern Utah that I interviewed this gentleman. He had that experience when he was around, I believe, 11, that they were playing hide and seek, and then suddenly his cousin, which was older than him, was further away from camp and telling him to follow him, and he would get to where he was, and then he'd reappear further up the trail, and finally came back after getting really scared and pretty far away from camp, only to find that his cousin was sitting at the fire and had never left. His mom had seen him the whole time. But when I wrote that story, I almost thought it was kind of a one-off. And I interviewed 3 other people that were in that very similar area over the years, have very similar experiences where something was trying to lure them into the forest and away from their family. So it's definitely creepy, really creepy.
Yeah, that plays into those stories that you've heard about doppelgangers, creatures that look like somebody or something. I mean, you can even have a doppelganger pet. Animals show up that's like, oh, that's my dog, and then you go to chase, your dog's gone missing or something. You chase it, and it's not. There's all those little stories, and that's kind of the doppelganger idea. But when you were talking about the guys that were out camping, and they were hearing like the woman, something that was kind of interesting to me is out here, if you hear the sound of what sounds like a woman screaming, it's either a fox or a cougar. Yeah. So you kind of just leave it alone, right?
Yeah.
If there are words being spoken, that's a whole different thing, and that's probably what these guys were experiencing. And that's completely haunting, and that's leads me into these questions about what we would call strange visitors in the night. People who talk about seeing something outside their home, like these guys experienced this with this bonfire story, or like knocks on the doors or the windows, or seeing things in your feet. Something that comes to mind is like the California walkers, the little things walking. You've seen those. Mm-hmm. But anyways, let's just talk about some of these weird stories about strangers in the night that come and seem to come to our house.
Well, one that jumps to mind for me was I interviewed this gentleman, and he had gone to go visit his friend, and his friend and his wife lived in the north or the northwest, up there, kind of northern California as well. And they'd spent a couple days, and he was sleeping on the couch downstairs, and he had fallen asleep the last night, and they had a big glass sliding door that if he turned, he could look right out there and into their backyard. And he woke up in the middle of the night to some weird scratching, and he looked, and standing at the door was this large, pale white creature. It had some similarities to the aliens with the large eyes and not a lot of features, but it was actually very muscular and everything. And it was just kind of trying to figure out how to open the door, is what it was basically trying to do. And he screamed, which, anybody would do. And it ran off, and his friend and wife come running down and everything. And they went into the backyard and looked and couldn't find anything. But it's fascinating to me that, it was trying to find a way in, that he had a very good look at what it was. And it's interesting, these stories of these creatures trying to get into the house or trying to get to you when you're camping, or I have several stories of people who've been camping or in the wilderness, and they come across these creatures that are emaciated. They almost look just like the walkers from The Walking Dead. But from my understanding, they're basically what Wendigo is, which is the natives talk about spirits or these entities that are created when somebody turns to cannibalism. Basically, they wander the world trying to find something to eat, and they're never able to fill themselves up. And those stories are also, really creepy. And you wonder if that's not where the idea of zombies came from for somebody. But
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's even stories about, like vampires. The vampire has to come, be given permission to come inside, or the real dark evil witch or whatever can't cross a line of, red brick dust.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be historical parallels like that between what people talk about today as opposed to what we've talked about for thousands of years.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, you talk about vampires and some of the other things, and in folklore, they're not allowed to come in your house unless they're invited. You basically have to give them power over yourself. Even in a lot of vampire stories, they're very seductive, but you still have to invite them to bite you or invite you into their life, basically. And a good parallel to that is the stories that I collect of the black-eyed kids and some of the other entities too, that they're mimicking or look like small children, but in order for them to get in your car or come in your house, you have to let them in, basically. And so, yeah, there's definitely parallels there with history and folklore and this idea that evil entities need an invitation into your life in order to affect you.
Yeah. And then this is all part of the uncanny valley. All of these are things that sound human, things that look human, things that seem to be human but are not. And one thing in particular that I had found in reading about the Mothman prophecies, or the Mothman situation, was this guy known as Indrid Cold. Have you heard of this guy?
Yeah, I have.
Let's use him. Let's talk about Indrid and kind of the weird stuff that is associated with whoever this thing is.
So it goes back to right around that same time with the Mothman. There was a gentleman that I cannot remember his name, was driving down the road, and actually there was a UFO that landed in front of his car, and out got this individual, and the UFO left, and he had a conversation with him, and it was also attached with the Mothman prophecies, but he looked human, but didn't act very human. And he, it was one of those things where he just didn't seem like he belonged there and gave off those creepy vibes. I interviewed a gentleman who had a very similar experience to that, that gave off of the very same creepy vibes as Indrid Cole. So he was a teenager, and he was supposed to go hunting with his brother up here in northern Utah. But his brother was sick, and so he went on his own. And he had found himself in the morning overlooking this area where he could watch for deer. And as he was glassing, below him was a kind of like an opening where there wasn't any trees. It was between the trees. And he'd looked at it several times. And then all of a sudden, the next time he glassed there was a gentleman standing there in the middle of it. And he was in a suit, and he had a hat, kind of like a 50s suit. This was in the late 70s, early 80s. And he had this suit and a suitcase and was just standing there still. And so he watched him for a little bit, trying to figure out where he came from. Finally decided to walk down there. As he approached the guy, he was trying to make noise so he didn't scare him, but he just was standing stock still. And when he finally got close enough, he said, cleared his throat and said, "Excuse me." And the guy kind of jumped and looked at him. And the guy didn't have any facial hair whatsoever, or any hair that he could see under the hat. No eyebrows, no nothing. And very pale. And the kid asked him, he's like, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "Oh, I seem to have misplaced myself." And he goes, "Oh," he goes, are you looking for some place?" And he goes, "Yes." He's like, "Where is your nearest township?" Which is not something you say in northern Utah. And he pointed him in the direction of down towards Bear Lake, where Lake Town was the nearest. And the guy said, "Oh, thank you. I thank you so much." And just in his suit with his suitcase, walked out and then headed that direction. And so the kid walked around this area trying to find his tracks coming in, and there was no tracks. It was just like he just appeared there. And he did note that there was a strange electrical burning smell in that area. And what's even more fascinating is after the guy left and after he looked around, he decided, well, I better walk back to my car. And when he saw the guy, it was like 9:30 in the morning. He'd talked to him maybe around 10, and it was about an hour and a half hike back to his car. So he should have easily been there by 11:30 or 12. But when he got back to his car, it was 4:00 in the afternoon. So there was time dilation involved in there too. He couldn't really tell how the time had passed and everything. I mean, just the entire thing was so strange. And again, it was very similar to that Indrid Cole incident where he seemed to be here, but not from here. So,
yeah, I mean, I've heard so many of these little stories about, like you said, you had the one entity trying to get into the guy's house, couldn't figure out how to use a doorknob. I've heard stories about people who have had sightings, experiences of some kind, and then people show up at their house dressed in suits. And then the way they would interact, just like one guy didn't know how to drink from a glass of water. I mean,
right.
Things like this. And we call these like the Men in Black, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those are fascinating stories. I've always loved the Men in Black stories. Some of the things that really fascinated me about those stories, there was one of a gentleman up in Alaska, and he had seen a UFO and was telling everybody about it and everything. And he worked at the front desk of a hotel there. And the next day, two gentlemen came in, black suits, tall, and again, no hair. They had no hair that he could tell of, mentioning to him that he shouldn't talk about it. He just imagined it, were very forceful. And then this feeling of dread, around them. But later on, they left. And later on, he was like, oh, man, we have surveillance cameras in here. And so he went to go pull the surveillance to see, but from the minute they walked in, he got a video of them. The surveillance caught them just walking in, and then it goes to static until they leave. It's, that's all he got. But you can look up, I believe, on the internet, you can look up the video of them coming in. And they are, they look just like he explained, but then there's not any video after or something. So it's fascinating, these people, the Men in Black.
Yeah, it's just, it reminds me, guys, the movie came out in the late 90s or whatever, and Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith, and it's like when Tommy Lee Jones shows up after Will Smith's character's like ran down this alien thing, he unplugs the camera in the room, and so of course and so it's kind of like this whole story has become, well, these are like normal people that are employed by an agency that is so black budgeted that nobody knows about it, and then it's kind of cute that it's this story, because we also have reports of like Kenneth Arnold and the UFO sightings he had up in Washington. And there was one around an island and stuff falling out of a UFO and guys showing up and taking all the evidence away. And they're just regular old G-men. And here with Indrid Cold, or this guy in the middle of nowhere, it's like they are completely foreign to human existence.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you wonder. I honestly wonder, how many people walking around or that we meet or something aren't really from here. It would not surprise me one bit when we finally get disclosure or anything to find out that
Right.
that there have been people that aren't from here that have been walking around, and who knows?
Yeah, most of them live in Manhattan.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Well, as we're talking about like some of these things that are a little creepy, and we spoke about that sensation of being watched, and I made sure to kind of bring up the way humans' eyes are, and the way that we can tell whether a person's looking at us. And it's the way that a lot of primates act too. Is a primate, some things like the bonobos or the chimpanzees can tell where they're looking because their eyes are similar to ours, but not so for all primates. Not all apes and primates are the same with their eyes. But something that's really weird and peculiar is reports of children, and you mentioned it very briefly, was the black-eyed kids. And I think that we can take some time here and just let's talk about that origin. Where did this legend come from? And do we have anything that's actually older than the 90s with Brian Bethel?
So yeah, one of the original ones that that we heard about, because he wrote about it and it was on a television show, was with Brian Bethel in the 90s. I have collected stories. I've actually collected a couple from the 80s that happened before that. It became more prevalent after he did that, but I believe personally it goes back a lot further than that, because in our folklore and history, we have stories of what are called changelings, where people believed that the fairies or the fae would come and swap their children for your child in the middle of the night, and you wouldn't know the difference, and you'd end up raising it to only have it turn and go away at a certain point. And also the fact that, again, we kind of talked about how with the dolls, you'll have entities that try and use what we believe to be innocent, like a doll you would think is innocent, or children you would think are innocent, and kind of use that against us. When the children show up, they often talk about, oh, I'm hungry or I'm cold. Can you let me in? We had an accident up the road. My parents will be here in a minute. Can you just let us in? And again, it's what saves most people is this innate fear that they have in the back of their head, with the alarm bells that go off. Because, and what's interesting, when I talk to a lot of people who are like, yeah, I had these kids that wanted in to my house or my car, and they're just a little kid. There's no reason I shouldn't let them in. And yet there's something screaming at me saying, do not let them in, And so that's one aspect of that black-eyed kids that I find fascinating, that they use this innocence to try and lure people in. The other thing, at least that I've noticed from everybody that I interview, they will oftentimes be very sick the few days after their interaction with the black-eyed kids, oftentimes sleeping for 24, 48 hours with a fever. And it's very similar to radiation poisoning, very similar to radiation poisoning. And so you wonder if there isn't something to that as well, because I've heard people talk about the possibility that they are, these kids are hybrids of the grays with the black eyes. And I've also heard theories that they're just evil entities that use the shape of children to try and get access, or even vampires in some cases, trying to use small children to access. So the whole thing is really creepy. It's one, there's some things that I listen about, like Bigfoot or some of these other things, and I'm like, oh man, I would actually like to see that. But Black-Eyed Kids is one that I would never actually like to be involved with at all. So, yeah.
So something that we should probably talk about is kind of some of the descriptions, right? We call them the black-eyed children, black-eyed kids, BEKs, because of their peculiarities. Let's just describe some of the standard, standard description of one of these.
So they're usually
things.
Yeah, usually there's two of them. Sometimes they're single, but usually there's two of them. The younger of the two is the first one that's usually talking. They have old style clothes or even worn out clothes. They avoid looking at you, obviously, to begin with. They're trying to hide their black eyes. And then the more insistent you are that you're not going to let them in, they then can start getting a little bit hostile and angry. Usually the older one will get involved after that, and making accusations and just trying to do everything they can to get in. It almost feels like they have a certain amount of time that they have to get into your house or to convince you. And then they disappear. One instance, this lady that I interviewed when she was in her 20s, she was house sitting her parents' house, and two young girls showed up in the middle of the night, and her light on her porch wouldn't work. She couldn't get it to turn on so she could see them. Only the next day for it to work just fine. And so the ability to conceal themselves is also another thing they seem to be very good at as well.
Yeah, so once again, one of the major identifiers is their black eyes. And I don't mean they have irises and pupils that are black. We specifically mean they have no whites in their eyes. They're completely black. And I think this is probably why we call them something similar to, maybe a hybrid or something like that. But as far as I can tell, when I read these stories, I don't have the same kind of feeling that we're trying to describe an extra biological entity of some kind. These seem a little bit more in the realm of, dare I push the button, demonic.
Right. It could very well be something along those lines, especially with the way the fear is just associated with them as well. So, but again, that could be a psychological trigger, or it could be a biological trigger for something that we know that our ancestors have even had to deal with, that we keep with us. So.
And so what are some of the, like I said, we've already said that, something, they might be this, like a hybrid or something, or we might be looking at, a paranormal entity. But what are some of these other theories that we have available to kind of try to figure out what's going on?
Like you said, there are some people that have put forward that they're hybrids, or that they are some sort of entity very similar to a vampire. And, when we think about vampires, people associate them with the drinking of blood. And that's been high in the culture. But in a lot of ways, the drinking of blood is actually just symbolic of draining people's kind of life force, if that makes sense. And so you have a lot of writers who write about vampires and stuff, and they talk about the drinking of blood, because, like I said, it's symbolistic of people who are able to drain your energy, or your soul, whatever you want to call that. And so in my mind, there's something along those lines that these kids want they want something from you, and it is, a very physical thing that they want from you, meaning, whether they want to take your energy, whether they want to physically take you, who knows? Like, there's not a lot of stories out there where people let them into the house and then they were able to tell that story. So it's hard to tell exactly what it is. One thing that's fascinating to me is that there are times where, when you've turned the kids away and you let them leave, or you tell them to go and you're not going to let them in, that they are picked up by a vehicle or something of that nature, which has happened a couple times in the people that have been, but it's always a large black vehicle and they leave. So rather than just vanishing into the night, which makes me feel like they are a real physical entity and not just a manifestation of something. So yeah, something. Would that shock you at this point? I don't think it would shock me.
It would not anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if we were to really pick something apart with the Black-Eyed Kids, what would be something you'd really want to kind of figure out?
Honestly, I would love to know where they're coming from and what they want. And why they're so prevalent in some areas, and why they pick certain individuals. Because it seems interesting that in an area of people, they single out, certain individuals, and why that is. That would be fascinating to know as well, perhaps. And maybe I should do a better job at, getting people's background when I interview them, to try and find out what makes them a candidate for those kids. Maybe there is a connection in there somewhere. That would be interesting.
Yeah, because I'm always curious about patterns, right? We have a lot of these little patterns that kick off with several different kinds of sightings. The Indrid cold situation, we had the driver have a UFO land, and then here's Indrid. And then the young man you spoke about, there's an electrical, scent in the air, which is, the first thing that came to my mind was, they sent a T-1000 back from the future, whatever,
Right.
And so clothed, thank goodness. No, mostly nude Arnold Schwarzenegger showing up somewhere. But it's like these witness reports, they do talk about electrical malfunctions. Yeah. And this is something that really seems peculiarly odd to me, because it's commonly in association with the time dilation, that's UFOs or aliens. But it's not just that, because there's usually electrical stuff that goes off when there's ghost apparitions.
Right. And that's fascinating too. The idea that there's some sort of dilation or some sort of electrical thing going on. One thing that ties in really well is I was watching a show not too long ago about UFOs, and the idea that they're able to travel so fast and why they're able to do what they're able to do is because they're manipulating gravity, basically. But one thing that stood out was the fact that they said, if you are manipulating gravity or you have something that's strong enough to manipulate gravity like that, it has to affect time because time is tied into gravity. And it kind of clicked in my mind that so many instances where people see UFOs or have this experience with this gentleman that I told you about in the mountains, and then there was some sort of time dilation involved in it. They either lose or gain time, or there's something, they can't figure out what it's going to, because most of the time you would automatically, at least I used to automatically jump to, maybe they were abducted and then they had their mind wiped. But what actually could be happening is because they're traveling through wormholes or however they're traveling, that manipulation of the space-time affects time and affects time around them as well. So it's the whole thing is just really cool.
That is pretty cool because that's like gravimetric distortions. This is a real actual science experiment where they have two atomic clocks. They've got one that's actually kind of really close to sea level, and they've got another one that's quite a ways up. And they are both set to the same time. And the one that's closer to the ground, if I remember correct, or closer to sea level, is slower than the one that's higher up.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. They're just now trying, learning more about how gravity and time affects each other. We often think of time just being this linear thing that we're traveling along, and yet in physics they talk a lot about the fact that it's our perception that moves along. Again, it gets so weird when you get into physics, but and it goes with, all these people, the scientists. I love the scientists that are like, oh yeah, we can never travel faster than light, so we can't time travel, we can't do all of these things. And yet there's a letter written in the 1900s from the gentleman who ran the patent office, writing to the president saying we should shut down the patent office because everything that's going to be invented has already been invented. And so it's that kind of thing where, it used to be that a lighter than air flight was not believable. We would never be able to fly. And yet we were, because our ideas changed. And it's the same kind of thing now, even when, Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, oh, we can never do this and we can never do this because of physics. And I just think, yes, you are much smarter than I am. But even I know that things change the smarter we get, and the further our understanding changes of it. So,
yeah, at the end of the day, it's a really weird thing to talk about. Creatures, entities, phenomena that just seem to want in by permission and permission alone. Whatever they are, whatever it is. Well, as we wind down, let's talk about the fact that you do a podcast. I mean, it's a pretty infrequent episode drop. We understand that. Yes. That's okay. You've got a lot going on your plate, John. So, right. You go around and you're doing things, but 2025 is going to be an amazing year. You've got all sorts of things that you're getting ready to release. What are some teasers for my audience?
Yes. So I'm working really hard. I actually have 2 books coming out this year, which I'm crazy for trying to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I have Stranger Idaho will be my next book that will come out, and it'll all be stories that I've gathered and are gathering from Idaho. And then I'm also releasing a Stranger Bridgerland paranormal field guide, where I kind of have all these different entities and creatures that I try and do descriptions about, and try and do the history about, and talk about the dangers and And, almost as if you wanted to buy a bird field guide, it's going to be like that, only about paranormal things. And so, and then I'm also speaking all over. If any of your audience is going to be around March 7th, I'm going to be down at UVU. I've been invited to go down and speak at their folklore symposium on the 7th of March. And then I've got some other speaking gigs that are coming up this year as well. So quite a bit going on. And hopefully my podcast will now become more frequent with some other things calming down in my life. So.
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else we could talk about, with whatever? I mean, because you did a show on the Black Eyed Kids. What was your big takeaway from your experience talking with, you did, I can't remember who you did that with.
Well, with my wife, we were just bouncing things back and forth. Yeah, she's my guest on the podcast. We're going to actually try and get some other people on there, but she's great because she's a great sounding board, because she's much more of the normal person's idea of what the paranormal is. So she has great questions and things that I might not have thought of because I've studied this forever. And but yeah, some of the things, just the takeaway is just how scary that can be. And the idea that you've got to be on guard all the time, which is fascinating as well. And that just how weird this entire world is. I just love how weird the world can be. The weirder it is, the better. So.
Yeah, I mean, human experience is what they are. I mean, it's one thing to kind of acknowledge the fact that, yeah, there's, hunters are going to talk about, they're going into the same areas where, bears are looking to get stuff, or cougars are looking to get stuff, or, this is a real thing. And the fact that we as humans very much are on the menu in some parts of the world. And so when we talk about disappearances, we do acknowledge the fact that animals can kill a person can fall and die and then be consumed. I mean, there's all sorts of like little things that do happen with the missing people, disappearances. And, some of these sightings with these black-eyed kids could very well be somebody who said, yeah, sure, let me give you a drive home. And, well, they never go home,
Right.
They are taken, or something happens, or they're found somewhere else,
Yeah, exactly. Or they're never heard from again. Who knows? It's very scary for sure. And like you say, you just never know what's out there. It's we're learning new things all the time, and you just never know.
Yeah, I think one of the largest things that I've learned over the years is that it's, the world really is stranger than we make it out to be. It's safer to just call everything coincidence, or to set aside our innate primal instincts and try to reside simply in, say the science mind or something that's a little bit rooted in reality. But is it really, or is that manufactured?
Right, exactly. That's the thing. It's safe to say, that's the thing, which is fascinating, and I hope it kind of plays into this, the fact that slowly, the news and the government has slowly been feeding us this information about UFOs. And what's fascinating to me is they'll talk about the fact that, yeah, we have UFOs, we have unhuman biologicals. And I'll go to my friends the next day. I'm like, oh, did you see that? They were talking about that. And they're like, yeah, I wonder what the next Marvel movie is that's coming out. It's like they don't even quite grasp the significance of this. And I'm just like, oh, you guys don't get it. And I feel sometimes like I'm all alone.
This is part of what we call the NPC syndrome, right? I mean, there's some people out there that really seem like they're just a non-player character, and it's strange. I mean, I've spoken to people who go, well, I run conversations in my mind. I'm able to like kind of think about and have like a running inner dialogue, and there's people out there that don't have this dialogue in their own mind, And it's like, how do you not have?
Yeah, that's me too. In fact, mine gets the better of me sometimes. My poor wife, sometimes I think she's crazy because, or she thinks I'm crazy is what I'm saying, because we'll be going down the road. I love the music on in the car because it distracts me from, and she loves to have it quiet in the car. So when we're together, it's quiet in the car. And I will just suddenly kind of I just kind of chuckle, be like, and she'll be like, what was that? And I'm like, nothing, because I remembered something, or something way back that was funny, because my brain is always running, and I don't want her to think I'm crazy, because I'm like, well, my inner dialogue said something funny.
That's exactly what happened. I told myself a joke and I laughed at it. What am I going to do?
Well,
yeah.
Yep. Oh.
So where can people find your stuff? I mean, let's give me your direct details again. I mean, we spoke about it at the beginning, but again, would be great.
Yeah, so you can find all of my books under the Stranger Bridgerland book series on Amazon. And again, they're softback, Kindle, and then also Audible. And you can reach me at strangerbridgerland.com, my website. If you've got a story, if any of your listeners have got a story and they'd love to tell me, I'd love to listen. That's what I do, is collect stories. And you can also look on there and see where I'm going to be next and some of the things I have coming up. So that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, John, for coming back on the show so we could talk more about the strange, the paranormal, and some things that are actually pretty normal.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. That hour flew by.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.